Okay, now that we have Vue.js installed and included inside our project, we can move forward to the next step of the fundamentals, which is actually how to create a Vue instance. Once it's installed and included, we can create a new Vue instance using the Vue function. And let's see how it works. So inside our main.js file, we need to create the instance like so. Okay, the Vue instance function accepts an object. So we create an object, and inside it, this is called the object, the options object. Okay, inside this we can define our application. So every Vue application starts with a new Vue instance, and inside the instance we can define an options object. And if you read the documentation, you will see that often the application is called VM as this VM variable, which is equal to what we wrote here. Instead of calling hub on the documentation, you will see it called VM, but it's the same thing. And so inside this main.js file, we create new Vue instance. We pass to the function an object, which is called the options object. And now the object that we pass to the Vue instance is called options object because it's split into multiple categories. So inside this object, we can add options as they are described in the Vue API reference pages to build our application. And the options object has properties divided into multiple sections, like the data, the DOM, the lifecycle hooks, assets, composition, and mixed categories. The first properties that we need to make a Vue application work is a connection between a root DOM element and some data options that it needs to work with. So let's start by making this connection and creating a root element inside our HTML file. So the first thing, so let's open up the HTML file. So inside the body tag, we need a root element. So an element that Vue.js connects to the instance and recognize it as the Vue application. So we create a div and we'll assign it an ID of app. Okay, and in here we will create our application. So the first thing that we are going to see now is the options object. Is the DOM is the DOM part of the options object. So I will leave a link in the description of the video or down below. So the first section of the options object is the DOM API that gives us access to a property called EL. Let's go back to the JavaScript file. So the property is called EL, and we can assign to this property. We use this property to select an existing DOM element to mount on our instance. This property accepts a string that contains a CSS selector or an element directly, so a DOM element. So what we are going to do is say just that. Okay, the element is called app, as an ID of app. So in the same way, we select an element, an HTML element in CSS, so using the underscore the hashtag sign. We do that for the element selection. So Vue, of course, okay, we did that, no? Okay, we did that here inside this div element, but we could do the same thing on the body tag or on the HTML tag, but actually we cannot because Vue discourages use of the body of the HTML tag and suggests to use a different element as a mounting point. So inside the body tag, we place this div with an ID of app. That's the root element that we connect to the Vue instance. So now, if we go back inside the so this main.js file, we can see that we have this EL element, this EL property, and we assign to it a string that contains our selector. So we instruct the Vue instance to monitor what happens inside the app element. So now that we have an element to work with, we can move to the next step and add something else to the options object and create our first data object. So the second part of this options object. So the second thing that we need to add to the options object after the DOM section is a options data. I will leave, of course, a link inside the description of the video or down below. And so when a new instance is created, it adds all properties found inside this data object to a reactivity system. So when a value in that object changes, the Vue will reflect its changes. That's one of the most cool things of Vue.js. And that's also at the base of the Vue.js reactivity system. To explain that a little bit more clearly, let's see a practical example. So let's create a data object. So to create a data object, we will need simply to pass a new property called data, and we assign to it an object. Okay, so the first thing we passed inside the options object is a DOM property. The second thing is the data property. So now this data property can contain everything we need to build our application. We created that. So the data object can be defined in two different ways, or like I did here, straight inside the Vue instance, or we could do also a different thing. I mean, nothing is not forbidden. So we could do like a data object and assign to this variable an object, and then in here you can say data object. Okay, that's the same thing. That's the same thing. There is no difference between the two approaches, but you might want to keep things together, and instead of using this approach, you might want to do it directly in here. Mostly when your application is really something small. Since we are learning it, I'm not going to split the things, but I will do everything straight inside the data object. So let's see how to add some information inside the data object. So let's add some properties. So since Vue.js is a JavaScript framework, we also need to remember that everything we know about JavaScript is still valid and can be used. So Vue.js is just an object, a big object, and it has a number of methods and properties that we can use to simplify and speed up the development. But we can also add something to it. So inside the data object, let's create something that we can later use inside our HTML file and render it to the page. So let's create inside here an alert message. So it's a new property called alert, and we assign to it a string. This is an alert message. Okay, so just a plain simple string. So inside the data object, it's an object, so we can do everything we do usually inside object, but it's a bit different from what you could expect coming from straight JavaScript. So we don't define objects methods inside here, but we will define them outside, and we will see that later. For now, we add only properties that contain some values in here. So let's also add something else. Let's say, for example, we have projects and it's an array. So we can add inside this array wherever we want, but we will add some objects. For instance, title. So a project has a title, of course. So portfolio, and as a description. Okay, and then we can create a couple of these and change the title. Okay, I'm not going to write the description for now. So we have the data object, we have some information, some properties inside the data object, and as we said, everything that is inside this object is used by the view instance as a property of the global object, and then of course we can use it inside our template files, and we will see how to use that in a minute. So the code above simply adds two new properties to the data object, an alert property and a project subproperty. The alert property is a simple string, while the project property is an array of objects. The elements of the array are other objects that represent a single project. Now that we have something to work with, we can see how to adjust this and modify these properties and its values. So let's see, the first thing that I want to show you is how to manipulate properties inside the data object. But let's first open this thing inside our browser. So let's run this with live server. Okay, so we don't see anything, which is fine. We have nothing to show for now. Could do an H1 view. Okay, and we will see this. Okay, fine. I think that I didn't mention earlier, but it might be a good time to do that. It's to install a Chrome extension called View, which will give you this new tab inside the console, and you can use it to inspect what we have inside the View application. So if you see here on the left side, we have a root element, and the root element has a data object which has some properties. So the alert property, which is the string, and the projects array, which has two objects inside it. So what we can do now using our view instance, so if I refresh the page, you'll see that the console tells me that I'm using the development version of Vue.js, which is fine. And now, how can we access these properties that we defined inside that object? We access them in the same way we access any other property of an object. In this case, our global object is the object stored inside the variable called app. So we need to do that, app. And if we see there, down here, we have a view object. So how do we access these options defined, these properties defined? Using the dot notation. And if we do alert, we have access to the alert. And if we want to change this into a different message, we can do simply this is a new alert. So in the same way you will do that in plain JavaScript, you do that now. And if I now call again the alert property, you'll see that it has the new value. So let's write this thing inside our file so we will remember them, but let's copy them in here. So if we want to use them somewhere, just to remember them, we can add the script here and then say that we will remember what we could do. And of course, we could say console log like that, and we will see the message that we wrote. So this is an alert message, but also we could do that. I'm doing that just to remember you, so to leave you a reference. So app dot alert equal I am a new alert message. And then now if we console log the content of this alert property, we will see two different messages. So this is an alert message, which was the original content of the alert property, and now what we changed. So just keep that as a reference so you remember that we can do this sort of things, but we will actually not do that. So let's quickly recap what we have done so far. So the code that we wrote here, it's simply we simply add two new properties to the data object, the alert and the projects, and we have seen how to manipulate properties in the data object. So we have seen how to adjust and manipulate properties using the variable that contains the view instance, which is called app in our case, and then we have seen how to reference these properties using the dot notation. So to access their content, we did app.alert in the console or inside the script file, which is the same thing. And when we opened the console, we saw that writing the app variable inside the console gave us the access immediately to the view instance object, and we could use the dot notation to get the properties from that object or change their contents. Okay, and of course, the same thing is valid. We did that only with the first property, but if we do app project, we will get a result, and the result is an array with two objects, and they are a bit different, but they of course have what we defined inside them. So again, the first example, we use the first example just to where it is here. So the first example here, we use it just to access a property from the global view object. In the second example, we use it to assign a new value to a property in the data object of the view instance. And finally, we used again this console log to output the content of the alert property, but also of the projects array. So that's pretty much it. But before closing this part, I want to show you that we can also access the entire data object using a couple of shortcuts, which are these two. So if we say app in the console and then dot data, this gives us the data object, so alert and projects inside it, but also we can use this $sign data from wrong, and we get the same result. Okay, so let me just copy that inside this file, so you remember that, console.log app underscore data and console.log app dot $sign data. Okay, two shortcuts to access these entire that object. Let's add a comment so you can refer to it. Okay, so now let's add two more comments before we close this section here and also here. Oops. Okay, so I'll leave you a couple of comments, but if you want, you can keep it uncommented. Okay, so you know what it does, and you'll see something inside your console. So again, we say that the options object is split into different sections, and we have seen the DOM and the data sections, and we have also methods. So the view instance gives developer access to a number of properties and methods out of the box, and default methods and properties can be accessed using a $sign, like we did for the data object, and that is used to differentiate the methods and properties defined by view from those defined by the user. So there are a number of instance methods and properties predefined, split into different categories, which are instance properties, instance methods and data, instance methods events, and instance methods lifecycle hooks. For example, with the following code, where it is. Okay, with the following code, we can get the data and options object or access the watch and on function. So a few more properties and methods defined by Vue.js. So let's see that. Let's see that in the browser first, and then we will copy what we do on the other side. So we have seen how to get the entire data object using the $sign. Okay, but we say that we have a global options object. So this one, show you. So this is the options object and this is the data object. The data object is inside the options object. So if we want, we can access the entire options object in the same way we did for the data object. And here we go. We have all the information stored inside the data object, including the data object and what's inside it. Another thing that we could do, for instance, is access the watch method. That, and that returns the method, so a function and its content. So we can expand it and see where it's defined. And also we can do, for instance, the beyond. So using on, so the on method, which is another function, and then we can see what it does and what its content is and where it's defined and read exactly how it's built. So I want dive deeper into that since it's out of the scope of this guide. But if you are interested and want to learn more, I'll leave you a link in the description, and you are free to learn more about that. So we said we have the DOM element section for the data object. We have the what was the other one? The data, and then we have lifecycle hooks. And the view instance gives to the user access to a series of functions called lifecycle hooks that let developers run code at specific time at specific stages of the view initialization steps. So inside all lifecycle hooks, we have access to their this variable that points to the view instance, and we will see that in future chapters when we need actually to use a lifecycle hook. But for now, I'll leave you, of course, a short overview of the available hooks. And just to name a few of them, we have a before create, that it's a function that let us run code when before the view instance is created. Then of course we have a created lifecycle hook that let us define insert code when the instance is created. We have mounted that runs our code when the element of the DOM is mounted, and we have many more of them. So later in the course we will use, if I'm not wrong, both the mounted and the created action lifecycle hooks. And of course, if you are curious and want to learn more about this topic, I suggest you to first check the diagram that explains you a bit in detail what this does and when it does. Let me see if it's here. Yes, it's near. So the view instance, and then different times, different points in time when the view instance is created, and where we can insert our code. So before it mounts the DOM element, after it mounted, before it's destroyed, or before update. So there are many of these. You can, of course, read this documentation. I'll leave all the links in the description below. So that's pretty much it for this video. That's all I wanted to show you. For each of these videos, for each of these sections, there is a repository online. You will see the link in the description of the video, and inside the repository you will see an overview of everything we said. So for this section, including some example and different things that I explained to you. But also you will see links to the documentation, and when each video is complete, so by the time you're watching it, there will be also a link to the YouTube, to the related YouTube video. So that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.